Go ahead.
What are some strategies you've seen or used when trying to introduce people to other games? A lot of my friends are in the Street Fighter 6 vortex and don't really try anything else despite all their complaints about the game. I've tried putting other games in front of them in casual matches to no avail while trying to teach them during it, not just steamrolling.
Okay. So I've written a lot about getting people to play other fighting games and why I think it's really good and generally just healthier for us to think of ourselves as fighting game players and not just a Street Fighter player or a Guilty Gear player or just a Street Fighter 6 player and a Guilty Gear Xrd player. This genre is incredibly rich. There's a lot of awesome games in there and they all kind of push us in different ways. And I think the really cool thing about fighting games is not just how good you can get at one game, but how you can use these games and characters and all the other different aspects of the genre to improve yourself kind of holistically. That said, if your friends are playing Street Fighter, and like right now, Street Fighter 6 is a very big game. If they're on that journey, if they're still very much Street Fighter 6 players, you kind of need to let them go through it and fully complete that process, that journey to their satisfaction. It's pretty hard to get in the way of someone, especially if this is their first time like really getting into a fighting game and really getting into a main game. So let's break this down a little bit. So the first thing to consider here is that when you're getting into a main game like this, you're feeling like you're part of the main event. And it's a very real thing. When you go to Evo and your game is last, that says to everyone else like, oh, we were all waiting for all the other games to finish because this one is the main one. It's the most important one to this event. And it feels really good to be a part of that. Especially if it's your first time really getting into a fighting game, it's comforting to be surrounded by that crowd of people and to hear everyone cheering and know that it's the loudest cheering that any game is going to get for that day. When people get into the big fighting games in particular, it's because they want that sense of commonality. They want to feel like they're sharing an experience with as many people as possible. And so it really offers a lot of just additional kind of excitement and validation for choosing to play that game. And when you're getting into Street Fighter or Tekken or any of the other kind of big like main games of the year, the popularity, the knowledge that you're engaging in something that's a shared experience across a lot of different people really helps people stick with it because they feel like all the attention is on the game they're playing and that everyone kind of there sharing in the same experience, really just feeling the mass of people around you all caring about that same game does a lot to add to the experience of playing the fighting game. It's why stuff like Evo status is such a big deal for so many people, and they'll often decide whether to play a game or not for that year based on its inclusion in Evo. And obviously not just Evo, right? If a fighting game is supported by a publisher tour, that's also validating in a very similar sense. Even if your friends or anybody who's playing these games is nowhere near having a shot at actually meaningfully engaging with like winning a publisher tour sponsored event or something like that. So yeah, it can get kind of frustrating, especially when you hear them complain about the game. And complaining about Street Fighter or Tekken or whatever while also only playing Street Fighter or Tekken or whatever is kind of a universal rite of passage or ritual for fighting game players because you wouldn't be complaining about it if you didn't care about it. And there is this very real sense when you get to a game and you stick with it, right? And you're feeling, this might be the first time that you really got into a fighting game, and so you're starting to feel that feeling of improvement and of increased control and fluidity and literacy in terms of the game for the first time. That's a lot of really powerful emotions. That's a really powerful experience to have. That's part of what keeps us playing fighting games. And when it's tied to such a big popular game like that, it's kind of hard to go and try other things because you then are reminded that you're actually not great at all fighting games. You're just good at this one that you picked up and played a little bit more than the others. And that feels awkward. And oh, you don't have a character, so now you gotta go learn the cast. And a lot of the comfort and the fluency and the fluidity that you experience by putting some serious time into Street Fighter 6, it's gonna feel like you're going back to the kind of old, the earlier, scrubbier version of you that didn't feel good at fighting games whenever you try something new. And over time, you learn to embrace that and seek it out. It's good to feel like a beginner because it forces you to reevaluate things and learn new things, but also relearn existing skills from a different perspective. But to get there for the first time is really disorienting and can feel really bad. So it can be hard for, again, I assume these are mostly kind of newer players that haven't been through this process or this journey before. It can feel pretty bad to feel all that progress kind of evaporate or feel less real because now you try out another fighting game and you're trash at it. But there's also something about not just the game itself, but that group shared experience outside the game where the time that you spend playing a fighting game is time that you're investing in connecting to the same thing that all these other people are connecting to. And so if I'm sitting down and I'm playing that big main game and I'm mashing in ranked or I'm doing training mode or whatever, that is time that I'm investing in a commonly shared experience. And when you ask that person who's very deeply involved in that journey to then take themselves out and play a different game. Maybe it's a game that's 20 years old. Maybe it's older than they are, right? Maybe it's a game with characters they don't recognize, and yeah, they'll play it with you for a little bit, but they won't really get invested because that time doesn't feel like it's being spent on the journey that they care about. So it's a very real phenomenon, and usually what happens, and I can say this like I used to be like this. When I first played Capcom vs. SNK 2 and got really into it, it was the main game at Evo for a couple years. And I played other games because I was mostly playing in arcades. And so if I lost, I had to wait in line and I'd go play Beatmania or I'd go try out Marvel vs. Capcom 2 or Third Strike or whatever. The time that I spent, especially the practice time, my practice time was mostly focused on Capcom vs. SNK 2. And I didn't really want to get into other games because it didn't feel connected to that journey. And also, I'm learning a whole bunch of different things while learning CvS2 that aren't immediately applicable to some of these other games. Over time, I grew to recognize that it would be better for my growth as a fighting game player overall if I just kind of learned all kinds of stuff and grew to really appreciate the learning process. If looking back in retrospect, I probably felt like my CvS2 skills were kind of brittle and that I didn't really have a strong footing in kind of the genre fundamentals. It was going back and playing some Super Turbo for the first time after spending a while on CvS2 that kind of taught me that there was value to learning these other games because really, when you look at it, it's a shared overlapping set of skills. But in order for me to put myself in that mindset, I had to get to the point where CvS2 was kind of on the way out. And that's a turning point because as a competitive player, I wanted to play against the strongest people I could find, and the bigger games are going to have stronger players. Just because there's more people playing, will push the game to higher competitive heights and so on and so on. And so when CvS2 kind of fell out of favor, like people were still playing it, but it was less widespread and people had moved on to Third Strike at that point. I didn't really like Third Strike. I had to ask myself if I wanted to keep on playing CvS2 or if I wanted to play Third Strike because that's where the action was. And I played Third Strike for a little bit and I didn't really grow to like it. It was actually only much later that I developed a respectful appreciation for Third Strike as a fighting game. But I had to go through that process of playing a main game, then kind of getting left behind and realizing that I couldn't make myself like the game that was the new hot shit. And so I had to go playing games for myself. I had to go choose a game that I played, not because it wasn't getting the biggest numbers at Evo or at locals or whatever, but just because I wanted to. And that game ended up being Guilty Gear. And I started playing it knowing, hey, this is probably never going to be the big thing, but that's fine, it's cool, and it was really important for me to have that experience of playing a more niche game after that. But I couldn't have done that, and I couldn't have appreciated it until I had that experience of going through the main game stuff. So when it comes to strategies to try and get your friends to play other games besides just Street Fighter 6, because no matter how much they complain about it, that's still the game that they care about the most, right? The main strategy that I have for Guilty Gear Xrd is I just surround myself with people who want to play that game because they love it. And you can generally tell when people are playing a game because it makes them happy and because they care about it, versus when they are playing a game for some of the reasons outside the game itself. This is kind of the double-edged sword about games and their event placement being kind of treated as popularity contests, and then you have like prize pools on top of that. there is a very real desire to play the game that everyone else is playing, because that is a more widely shared experience, and so in many people's eyes it's more valuable. But the downside is that when that game no longer has the hype, it's lost the favor of the crowd or the favor of its publishers or whatever, you might look at that game and go, oh, actually, maybe I don't want to play this anymore. And that, to me, was the saddest thing. My approach to fighting games, as someone who's been doing this for a long time, is that I understand that there are games which I want to play forever, and so I will generally play those games forever. But then there are games I'm not sure about, or games where I just want to try out because I want to learn what they're about, but I'm not really committing to. And in practice, what this means is I have a handful of games that I'm playing basically at least a little bit all the time. I'm playing Exerd, I'm playing CvS2, I'll play Marvel 2, I'll play Plus R. There are some games that are kind of on my backlog, like VSAV. I want to go back and pick that up properly once I feel like I have less stuff to grind in the games that I'm currently playing in my active rotation. And then when a new game comes out, I'll play it for for me, like maybe 70 hours is usually enough to get an idea for it. So that's about like a month and a half of pretty consistent grinding. And then I'll put it down, because I understand that it's not a game that I want to play for the rest of my life. My standards for that kind of thing are pretty high. When I surround myself with people who are playing a game long after all the kind of external hype is gone, right? You don't have the pop of the crowd of thousands or tens of thousands of people watching and playing it at the same time. You don't have the prize pools coming from the publishers. All you have left is the game that you're playing and the people you're playing it with. And for any fighting game, that's eventually going to be all you have left no matter what, because people will always move on to the next new thing, unless there aren't any new things, which hopefully we don't have to worry about ever again. So in those situations, it's really easy to tell who's sticking around just because they love the game. And those people, in my experience, tend to be having a lot more fun with it. They tend to enjoy their journey a lot more because they know what they're there for, and what they're there for is exactly what's in front of them. Part of the promise of prize pools and big arenas and stuff is that you imagine yourself being a part of that. You imagine yourself being in center stage. There's no one, I think, who bought Street Fighter 6 and didn't daydream about winning that $1 million at Capcom Cup or winning Evo, right? Everyone's got those. I think of buying those games as the license to have those daydreams, right? And that's part of what sells those games. It's part of why all the esports stuff exists. Once that's gone, you have to ask yourself if you really like the game or not. So for me, the strategy is just to play games where I don't need all that stuff to get excited about it. And I play them with people who feel similarly. And over time, people, I think, look at what we're doing and go, hey, they look like they're having a lot of fun. Let's go check it out, right? Let's go try. I may have never had interest in Guilty Gear Xrd, but they're always having the most fun. They're always the last people to leave the setups. So yeah, maybe I'll give it a shot and see what it's all about. Because the thing is that once you have kind of disconnected yourself from that first experience of playing a main game, probably for at least a couple years and going to multiple Evos and whatever, blah, 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 the kind of the usual player curve for any extremely popular fighting game. Once you go through that process, and maybe the first time, maybe it's the second time, maybe it's the third time, but eventually you go through that process and you're like, I don't know, maybe I don't want to move on, or maybe I want to try something that isn't the big thing. When you look at all the time that you spent and you realize that some of what got you excited about the game wasn't the game itself, but it was all the people, or daydreaming about prize pools or whatever, that starts to make the experience itself feel a little bit hollow. And I always found that really sad. So yeah, I think the primary strategy is just to play the games you love and have a good time playing them visibly with other people who are also having a good time playing those games because they love them. And accept that your friends might never love the fighting games that you love, and that's okay. That's the other kind of side to this advice. Some of my oldest friends in fighting games don't play Exerd. Or if they do, they don't play it like super deep. They messed around with it for a little bit. Maybe they came to some of my tournaments, put in a good faith effort, but ultimately it wasn't the game that they care about. And I still see those friends like almost every week. And instead of playing Exerd, we will either, we play golf, right? We'll go to the driving range. That's our new shared fighting game. We'll go back and play the old games. I think Marvel 2 is the one that has kind of stuck around the most as a game that we all, or most of us, care about to a certain amount. Sometimes we'll buy the new games and mess around with them, and we don't like them, so we stop playing them and then go back to either golf or Marvel 2 or whatever. So we're still friends, and we still have that connection. We might watch events together for games that we don't really actively play. But that's kind of what happens. Fighting games are ultimately something so individual that it is not easy to fall in love with the same thing that, you know, presses your buttons on all the right ways and also presses all your homies' buttons in the exact right ways too. And that's just part of the journey. It doesn't mean that you can't still hang out with your friends or find other games to play with them. Or maybe you play Street Fighter 6 a little bit, you know, just to kind of entertain them and then, you know, keep whatever it is you want them to play, you know, give it a shot. But wait until after they're done with their Street Fighter 6 journey or on the way down. It doesn't have to be done. It doesn't have to be Street Fighter 7. It might just be like, oh, a balance patch came and they're not really into it, or, you know, something happened to take them out of the game and they realized they didn't want to get back in, or they really don't like playing against Mai because she's super cheap. I don't know. It's an experience that you kind of have to let them finish on their own terms or arrive at that point themselves. And once they are there, they'll, you know, be there for them, and maybe they'll have fun playing these games with you and it's great, or maybe not, and they'll go find something else to do. You can't force that journey to finish. You just kind of have to be there for when it does. But it's a great question. Good luck. Let me know how it goes, and thanks for asking.